Welcome to Noodle Dome, where your mind takes center stage. Dive into a state of creative thinking, exploring ideas that twist and turn like noodles. Join us on this journey through the labyrinth of thought. Welcome to the Noodle Dome.
The response from the citizens of Southlake to the federal government needs to be to go to hell.
Hey, thanks for coming back to our show. We've been taking a hiatus. Actually, we kind of wanted to retire from this. And I think we fought the good fight over the last 2 or 3 years. We had a total house cleaning at the school board, to some degree at the administrative level. And so we were pretty happy with the way things are going. The left took a sound shellacking in the polls. They lost decisively all the polls. We became a national figure fighting against the woke agenda, diversity, equity, inclusion, CCAP and DDC, words that I thought that we'd forget forever, and unfortunately we didn't. And if you want to have an idea of what we're going to be talking about today, well, one of my team members, and his name is Mr. Wizard. And Mr. Wizard, how you doing today?
Doing great.
Juan, how you doing today?
Let's get it done, brother.
Let's do it. And what we came upon was what looks like a rather unholy alliance. And it looks like there is potentially some communications that's going on between government agencies such as the OCR, maybe the NAACP, and local entities, plus all the news media, Mike Hicksonbaugh and Cordet, and Tony Hilton, Anna Kaplan at the Dallas Morning News, Fort Worth Star, Telegram. I think which started in 1906, and I think Mr. Wortham would be a little bit disappointed if he saw what had happened to his newspaper. And specifically, I'm talking about Elizabeth Campbell. And they never say anything positive about our community. Everything that they ever write is negative, and they're trying to bring down our community. But what we want to do is point to the connectivity that we're seeing between these entities and potentially the OCR. And Mr. Wizard, as always, has done a heck of a lot of research to at least have a good discussion about whether or not we've got a real problem. And we have to understand that there's a new term that's been coined called lawfare. And I think what we're looking at, I think it originates from the Joe Biden administration through his DOG, Attorney General, down to the DOE, over to the OCR. We'll talk about that inflated beast that's got 550 attorneys making over $100,000 each, spread across 12 divisions. So I think it's going to be in your best interest to listen and understand what we found and realize that, Juan, you were reminding me of this, when good men do nothing. How does that one go?
And when good do nothing, evil prevails. Evil prevails.
Right. So I do want to reach out, particularly to the center-minded conservatives and liberals in our community that will listen to a fair discussion. And that's what we want to have today, is a fair discussion. So with all these points in mind, let's have Mr. Wizard kick this off and kind of give us an idea and lead us through what he's found.
All right, so I wanted to start and talk a little bit about the Office of Civil Rights. So the Office of Civil Rights is a division of the Department of Education. And a lot of people think the Department of Education has been around a long time, but it really hasn't. It was established in 1979 under the Carter administration. And I think you can argue that, I think as charitable argument you can make is that it's been neutral to the education of our children. And in reality, I think it has harmed the education of children in this country. So the Office of Civil Rights is a division of the Department of Education, and they have the authority to investigate allegations of violations of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So discrimination on the basis of race, age, religion, sex, disability, that type of thing. They, as you mentioned, 12 offices across the U.S., including one in Dallas. And the offices are made primarily of attorneys. They do have some support staff, but they're primarily attorneys. The Dallas office has 29 attorneys and 2 supervising attorneys. Some of those general attorneys, 29 general attorneys, some of them are senior attorneys that I suspect, because of longevity, They have something in between a general attorney and a supervising attorney. At any rate, you're correct. The average salary of a general attorney is $103,000, $141,000 for a supervising attorney. The Dallas office is made up of 19 female attorneys and 11 male. So that's 61% female, 39% male. You know, the state of Texas is 50-50, or about 50-50 male and female. So, and the population of attorneys in Texas is 63% male. So they had to work really hard to have a disproportionate number of females on staff.
Do you think you could drill down even further and subcategorize that into, well, let's just call it Republicans and Democrats? How many Republicans do you think are on the, of that 550? Would you be willing to venture a guess? And do they even talk about that in the OCR?
So no, of course not. But so I researched every attorney, and not every one could I find information on. Some of them have no social media, they have no LinkedIn. But I was looking for, you know, connections to donations to Democrat, Democrat candidates or Act Blue, things like that. It appears to me that it's at least 75% Democrat, and many of them appear to be pretty hard leftists. There are at least a couple of what looks like decent people in the office in Dallas from the research that I did. But every demographic attribute that I looked at, it's the same thing. It doesn't. The point is, the office doesn't reflect Texas. It doesn't reflect Southlake, and I think that's the very point of it. Is as much as they talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, the reality is they don't want to reflect.
Well, when it suits them,
right.
Of course.
Right.
Right.
So,
hey, and before you get into this too far, I really want to speak directly to, I hope that our entire school board will be listening to this, but beyond that, I hope the school boards all across Texas are going to listen to this, because this is going to give them some arrows in their quiver on how to fight this. And also, if you're a local politician all the way up to the state level, maybe even the federal, hopefully Ted Cruz will be listening to this, who knows. But I really hope you listen to what we spent a lot of research on. And look, we're just three regular guys, Army, Marine Corps, corporate USA, and you know, we don't have any special skill sets other than the fact that we have a burning desire to get to the truth. And that's what we hope that you're going to ascertain as you listen to this episode.
So the authority of the OCR only extends to entities that receive federal funding. So if you're a private school and you're not receiving federal funding, they really don't have any authority over you. Now, they could open a complaint and then turn it over to the Department of Justice, but that would have to be a pretty egregious situation for them to do that. So it really only applies practically to public schools. Anyone can file a complaint. There's an 11-page document online. I'll put one up on the screen so people can get a sense of what it looks like. You can email it or fax it to the OCR.
I think it's an important question to ask at this point. Is that a problematic process? Can that be used for nefarious?
Of course, that's where meddling can begin. So you can solicit complaints. You can connect complainants with third parties that know how to write complaints in the right kind of language that will, get past the first hurdle, which I'm about to talk about. So this is where the meddling can really begin, is that point of solicitation of complaints.
And I'm sure you'll dig deep into this, but is there a due process issue with this whole process?
Oh, we're going to dig into that. No.
So my question would be, do we have any idea that that's actually happened? I remember reading the CCAP, and it made a point in that very document that we did not have these problems. There was no disparate impact on any specific population when they looked at test scores and those kinds of things.
The work that I've done shows that that Southlake, Carroll ISD outperforms other school districts across essentially every variable.
Yeah, consistently.
So the idea that there's disparate impact among Carroll ISD students versus Dallas ISD or Fort Worth ISD, I don't think you could support that at all.
Yeah, and you would think that somebody that's actually interested in the education of children would be saying to these other communities, hey, you guys should be doing what Southlake is doing and not the opposite, which is what we're seeing.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Of course, because they don't control us. And in the end, that's what this
and
is
that's
really
what it's about. Yeah.
How would a minority kid fare here in Southlake compared to Irving or compared to some of the schools in Houston that are being taken over by the state?
Well, I've
Compared
looked
to
at
Senator Royce K. West district, for
Yeah,
example.
let's take a look at Mr. West, the one that loves to be AstroTurf and show up here all the time. What?
So the data that I have seen, I've looked at Fort Worth and I've looked at Dallas, and the data I've seen, being able to read at grade level in Southlake, Carroll ISD is in the 90 plus percentile.
Across the board.
Across the board, and also with African American students. I mean, it's across the board for everybody.
Right.
And there's really no major differences among racial groups. And that was even a point that was made during the CCAP process. But when you look at Dallas ISD and Fort Worth ISD, you see significant differences among racial groups. You have, I think you had brought up a statistic that 50%.
Yeah, I
were
was
doing
looking
math
at a
grade level.
national average. I couldn't find data after 2019. I'm sure 2020 and COVID didn't help things. But at that point, what I found was that only 7% of black 12th graders were proficient in 12th grade math. Only 4% were in advanced reading. 50% were not even considered partially proficient in reading at the 12th grade level. And look, other people can think what they want. I'm a minority. I firmly believe that it has nothing to do with race, and it has everything to do with the environment that you put these kids in. And they're not getting the good, conducive learning environment where they are, but they are in Southlake. So all of a sudden we've got these, government goons basically allied with progressive neo-Marxist crazies in our community, very few of them, but they're loud, coming in here and wanting to make us look like them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
to that point, Creed held a meeting. Creed, along with Indivisible 24, which is a local leftist activist group, held a meeting in September 2023. And in that meeting, the discussion in the meeting was NAACP, Legal Defense Fund, and the OCR complaints. That was the entire purpose of the meeting. And in that meeting, they handed out flyers with QR codes to essentially solicit for complaints. And the reason they're doing this is, to Guy's point, they lost at the ballot box, and their only hope of getting their agenda implemented here at Carroll ISD is through an authoritarian federal government to impose it on us. And so what they want to do is they want to fill the pipe up with OCR complaints, because they're going to nibble away at it, right? So every complaint goes through an investigation, and ultimately it's a negotiation, then another negotiation, then another negotiation, until when you're finally done, you have a full CCAP and then some program that's been implemented at Carroll ISD.
Right.
So-
Well, one thing they've been parroting is they've been saying, well, because I think it was an LDF attorney at that meeting that you're talking about that said, well, if the LDF or not, if the OCR is coming and saying we want to negotiate with you, that means they found something. And my thinking is quite the contrary. If they're saying they want to negotiate, that tells me they probably found nothing, and they're fishing. Because if the federal government finds something, they're not likely to say we're going to negotiate. They're likely to demand.
I do want to clarify. LDF is Legal Defense Fund, connected to the NAACP. Correct me if I'm wrong on this. And NAACP has a very convenient relationship with DOJ, Department of Education, the AG, and probably Mr. Biden, or President Biden himself.
Well, yes. I think the thing, as I did this research, that became really apparent to me is this entire thing is about power. So it's been weaponized, because I don't think you're going to see a lot of the complaints that have been filed here would have never made it past the first hurdle I'm about to talk about if it were Dallas ISD or Fort Worth ISD or Houston ISD, because they've already captured, for the most part, those school districts. And so they're going to target Carroll ISD and Katy ISD, districts that are pushing back on their agenda. And so essentially, and it shouldn't be any surprise, we're seeing the weaponization of the federal government at every level.
Last question before you jump into your phenomenal research that you do, Mr. Wizard. If you were a black family that has kids that are being introduced into the public school system, will they fare better in Mr. Royce Jones' district, or will they
West, yeah.
West? Sorry about that,
Yeah.
Royce West district, or will they fare better here in Southlake?
There's absolutely no question. If you're raising a black child, you would want to be in the Carroll ISD, and they know it.
And how about violence? How many, literal violent acts have been committed against any of the kids across the board? When I say violence, I mean the stuff that you see coming out of Houston where two black kids get into a fight and ends into a gunfight. A couple of months later, they beat the living hell out of one of the teachers. The teacher gets in an actual fist fight. Teacher was black, students were black. Does that stuff go on here?
You are all niggas on blood. You are. Bitch ass nigga.
Not that I've ever heard of.
But
I've
isn't that
never heard of
violence?
any of that kind of violence at Carolina. Now I've heard of fist fights between a couple of guys.
High school.
Right. That's right. That happens.
Yeah.
But I've never heard of that kind of violence. Any kind of violence with a weapon or anything like that.
And that's even in the context of you, a couple of maybe a year ago, going back and looking through all the different complaints that were alleged over a couple of decades.
Yeah. Oh no.
Yeah, look, this is a whole different sidebar discussion
Yeah.
on what violence really is. But I think what they've been able to do is to bastardize the meaning of violence.
So the complaints, making a complaint, the only limitation is it has to be within 180 days. Now, there are instances where if you don't make it within 180 days, you can get a waiver in some cases, meaning they'll extend that limitation out beyond the 180 days. But that's really the only limitation. And I think that's also why they want to embed in the schools. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in a few minutes. So once a complaint is filed, there's an initial evaluation process that occurs. And this is where the subjectivity among the staff at the OCR can really come into play. So according to NBC reporting, only 5 to 10% of complaints that are filed pass this first hurdle, 5 to 10%. But I'm pretty certain that we're batting at 100% in Southlake, meaning every complaint that's been filed that I'm aware of has made it to the next level. So that alone is really questionable, why we'd be batting 100%, whereas the national average is 5 to 10%. Now, they lead you to believe that, these complaints are so egregious that, of course, they've made it through. That that's a lie. We just talked about violence. Right. There's no violence here, and they know that. So this initial point is where conflicts of interest, political bias, or even corruption can enter the process, because all of these decisions in terms of getting past this first hurdle are made by the attorneys and staff at the Office of Civil Rights. The Office of Civil Rights. So if someone inside the OCR had an interest in a case or cases, they could influence the decision to accept a case that might otherwise be rejected if it were a different school district. So once it's passed the initial evaluation, it moves on to what's called the investigation phase. And the investigation, just like that initial phase, is done by the staff at the OCR. So determining guilt or innocence is determined not by a judge or by a jury, but by the attorneys and staff at the Office of Civil Rights. And the standard they use is preponderance of the evidence. And what this means is it's more likely than not that the law was violated. And that's, of course, a subjective standard. You know, if you think about a criminal trial where you've got a jury, it only takes one juror to disagree to block a conviction. And in this particular instance, you don't have that kind of a standard. You've got, I already mentioned what the staff, the makeup of the staff at the OCR. These are the people that are making, what appears to be sort of emperor-like authority decisions to pass judgment over schools without really any transparency in the process at all. And that's a key point, is there's no transparency in any of this. So following the investigation, the OCR may seek to negotiate an agreement to close a case. And as Cam said, and as just came up here a minute ago, it doesn't mean that they found guilt. It just means that they want to negotiate to resolve the complaint and make the complaint go away. And agreements typically involve changes in policies, procedures, changes in the training or the hiring processes. And refusing, to your question, Guy, refusing to negotiate a resolution may lead to the termination of federal funding, meaning they stop sending the federal funds, or In an egregious case, they might pass it over to the Department of Justice, and the Department of Justice may open up a case. The Department of Justice may open up a case. I think the truth of it is I think they would lose in court if there were a lawsuit over the funding, because these cases are so weak, and I don't think the Department of Justice would pick any of these up. And that's the reason why they want to negotiate in good faith. All the people that would have been responsible for any of those prior complaints are gone because we've cleaned it up. I think that's the point that you're making.
And our adversaries would like to bring those people back.
Oh, of course they would.
Right.
Of course they would.
And that's what's so
But this
ironic
is
about all
also why they need to fill the pipe up with new complaints, because they want to prove that, oh, this is an ongoing problem, and therefore the only solution is the solution that we have, which is, in fact, let me read it, because I have a list. So at that same meeting in September that Creed and Indivisible 24 held, the attorney that was there representing LDF, she's a pro bono attorney, she listed out some likely demands as part of a negotiation. So let me just read through these and see if any of these are familiar to you guys.
Okay.
Implement D&I training for students, teachers, and administrators. Hire a director of equity and inclusion. Implement hiring practices based on race, religion, sexual orientation, etc. Implement inclusive and culturally responsive curriculum. Approve and provide resources for identity-based student organizations. Provide culturally competent counseling. Implement reporting systems for alleged discriminatory conduct. Build equity and inclusion grievance processes. And hire mental health consultants. Does any of that sound familiar?
Yeah, It sounds exactly like the SARC demand letter that we saw.
I think the point of this one is the CCAP fight never ended. So for those people in Southlake that are under the mistaken impression that, oh, we won at the ballot box and therefore we defeated CCAP, that's a naive perspective. They never stopped fighting. They just moved to another battlefield. And what they're doing is they're fighting at the federal level. So they want the federal government to do what they couldn't do. So here you go. Those defenders of democracy, right? They want to tear down democracy, tear down the will of 70% of the people in Southlake and impose their will, using the federal government, the authority of the federal government to impose their will.
Well, I want to pause here and make a point as well about this, because we just had the district recently engage Alliance Defending Freedom to sue the federal government over Title IX. And I know you may talk about that later, I don't know. But going on offense, and I hear from these, this marginalized group of, and marginalized in a good way, right? Because they don't represent the will of the people, which they hate. They hate checks and balances, so this is why they do what they do.
Right.
But they're complaining that, oh, you guys are just, this is somehow some kind of conservative rage, and you're going after a problem that doesn't exist. And I go back to, hey, wait a minute. You said you wanted politics out of school. We have worked to get politics and keep it out of school, right? And what you're doing is you're trying to bring these folks in because we will not allow you to bring your politics into the school.
That's right.
Right? That's what's going on here.
That's right.
Yeah.
Let no one be mistaken about that.
I got to echo, though, the whole trope of threat to democracy.
Oh, right.
What do they call that? Projection?
Oh,
when they're
of course.
doing exactly what they're accusing you
Of course.
Yeah.
That's right out of Rules for Radicals.
Let's continue on, Mr. Wizard.
So with that context around the Department of Education and the Office of Civil Rights, I want to talk about one particular senior attorney at the Dallas office. And the reason I want to talk about this attorney is because, as it turns out, she lives right here in Southlake. And I can connect her to leftist activists in town. And that's really disturbing given the discretion that these attorneys and the staff have at the OCR to determine what complaints get past that initial evaluation and which ones get investigated and so forth, and then the investigation itself. There's a lot of subjectivity in that. So that attorney's name is Sakina Vidacek, and she moved to Southlake from Arlington in 2012 with her husband and a couple of kids. And I can't find a ton of information about her prior to her parents purchasing a home in Bedford in 1980. She would have been around 10. It appears that her family may have had some connections in Canada, maybe even lived in Canada. I'm not sure if Sakina was born in the U.S. or she was born in Canada. I really don't know because there's no information there. At any rate, she graduated from St. Mary's University with a law degree in 1996 and began her career with the Department of Education in 1997. So basically, this is the only job she's ever had. So, you know, the fact that an OCR attorney lives in Southlake is not particularly concerning, but it's the other information that I found that I did find concerning. So, for example, in 2020, her daughter Yasmina signed the SARC demand letter. I also found it concerning that that same daughter had attended a protest march in Fort Worth. It was January 2019, and she attended it with the daughter of a well-known leftist activist in town. So in social media posts, I found images of Sakina's daughter, Yasmina, at the march with Lindsay Huff. And Lindsay Huff is the daughter of Jennifer Huff. And as a reminder, Jennifer Huff is an officer of Dignity for All Texas Students, and she's been engaged in activism in Southlake for a long time. Both Jennifer Huff and Lindsay Huff signed the SARC demand letter as well. I don't think anybody would be surprised by that. Now, Lindsay Huff was featured in an NBC nightly news segment with Antonio Hilton in 2021 or 2022. It was the one where 3 girls wearing masks were interviewed outside the senior high. And Jennifer Huff was quoted in an article by NBC saying, "The only way we're going to get any change in here is if the Department of Education comes in and does something." Almost seems like maybe she knew something. So here's what I would say is, you know, maybe Sakina didn't know that her 14-year-old daughter was attending a protest march in 2019. Maybe she didn't know that her daughter had signed the SARC demand letter. Maybe she didn't know her daughter was friends with a well-known leftist activist in Southlake. Maybe she just didn't know. But then again, maybe this is just a family tradition, because for those that have been following more recent events, you probably heard about the Unlocked Library. And as it turns out, Sakina's son was a founding member of the Unlocked Library at the Carroll Senior High. So the Unlocked Library was, you know, supposedly a book club, and it was approved by Ryan Wilson in 2023. And Ryan Wilson is the principal of the senior high school. So while it pretends to be a book club, in reality, it's an activism club promoting the same, you know, leftist ideology as the anti-Semitic groups are.
So the genesis of this book club really was about, we're going to take these books that the district has deemed inappropriate, not banned, that's
Right.
their word, right? And it doesn't
Yep.
mean what they think it means.
Right.
Inappropriate, so books that have depictions of sexual acts or descriptions, graphic descriptions of sexual acts that don't belong in a public school library, right? And they're saying, well, since you're going to not have those books in our library, we want to make sure that we have them, and we're going to make them part of our book club.
And this is not the sex ed that we all learned our freshman year in high school. This is
No, this is things like
straight
gender
up,
queer.
This is straight up
This is
hardcore.
This is all about normalizing fringe sexual behavior, whatever you want to call it, right? And trying to push it on everybody else.
I think on the surface, that's what they're trying to do, but in reality, this is just a leftist activism club. Because when I look on their social media account, what I see is posts that are promoting the Office of Civil Rights, posts that are promoting the Legal Defense Fund. Why would a book club be doing those things?
So very tied into what's going on with this particular issue.
Exactly.
And what are the chances that he would be the son of a civil rights attorney working this very issue?
Precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely. So I think the answer is pretty clear. What they're trying to do is form a group that can then radicalize a small group of kids and convince them to make complaints to file complaints, funnel those complaints to LDF, and then ultimately file them with the Office of Civil Rights. So they're really, this is just sort of a pipeline between the schools and the Office of Civil Rights. That's all this really is.
Right.
What are the policies and processes for the Office of Civil Rights attorneys to recuse themselves from cases? Did Vidacek recuse herself from any conversations, decisions, discussions, or influence over any of these Southlake cases? And where's the documentation that confirms she formally recused herself, that they built a firewall between her and all these cases? Where's the evidence? And we deserve evidence as citizens of Southlake. Did Vidacek participate in the soliciting of any of these cases, or any cases that are yet to be filed, for that matter? Was she involved in connecting people with the Legal Defense Fund, or the law firm that's supporting them, or any other law firm, for that matter? What communications did VitaCheck have with local activists regarding CCAP prior to these complaints, or any OCR cases, or any of the students that filed the cases? Now, sources have told me that the original OCR attorney assigned to the Southlake cases may not have seen any wrongdoing, and so the OCR reassigned those cases to another attorney. I can't verify that, but that's what I've been told. And
Double
so
dipping? Are they double dipping the case, essentially?
Well, it sounds to me like they weren't getting the result that they wanted, so they moved to another attorney that was going to give them what
Right.
they wanted. That's what it sounded like. And so my question is, did VitaCheck have anything to do with any of those decisions?
This is an important drill down because it would superficially it looks to me like she has bias. Now, we don't know that because we don't have her in her interview. And by the way, Sakina, I really would love to have you come in and the two of us just have a chit chat about this. But if she does have a bias, could she have possibly poisoned the well with her other comrades at the OCR at the Dallas level?
Well, again, Guy, there's zero transparency. We don't know how these decisions are made. What are the specific standards to evaluate a case?
Do we see the charges? Do we know the charges?
No, we have not read it. We can't see any of the
Do we
cases.
know who placed the charge?
No, we know not. That's the whole point. There's zero transparency.
This is
in
not
any
the
of this.
way America rolls.
Of course it's not. This is like right out of the USSR. And never forget that their leverage is our money.
Yeah.
They take our money and say,
Right.
the only way we're going to give it back to you
Yeah,
is
I've
if
been
you...
hearing that, right?
What is
We're
100,000
gonna-
times 550? Just roughly speaking.
Yeah, right.
It's millions.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not a math major. I flew airplanes, but I'm just telling you, it's millions of dollars, and they're not free money that came like manna from heaven.
That's right.
This is your money, my money, your money. And
Right.
we're paying for these hired guns
Yep.
to come after us in our community.
It's crazy. So the last question I have is, has VitaCheck been in contact directly or indirectly with the media, specifically NBC News, Mike Hixenbaugh, Antonia Hilton, any of the other people you mentioned at the beginning of this podcast? Because what concerns me is the timing, for example, of the announcement that they want to negotiate on cases coming at the same time that Mike Hixenbaugh is releasing his book.
What a question.
Yeah.
What a coincidence, right?
By the way-
and the fact that the original 3 cases were announced days after conservatives won the controlling seat on the board. What a coincidence.
Right.
On Mike Hixenbaugh, right quick. So he just released a book. We're thinking about releasing a counter to that called The 3 Lies of Mike Hixenbaugh +1, because the +1 would be the name of his book. They came for your schools. No, you came for our schools, Mike
Right.
Hixenbaugh,
Right.
Antonia Hilton.
We just stopped you.
We have a whole episode on Mike's lies.
Oh, we did.
Elizabeth Campbell, Anna Kaplan. You are the guys that are coming after our schools. Miss Kaplan, who's got I love Beto signs all over his front yard.
Yeah.
Like you're not biased, my dear.
The citizens of Southlake need to stand up, right? And,
Yeah.
and my message to the citizens of Southlake, having looked at the way the process works and looked at the potential conflict of interest that exists with one of their attorneys, the response from the citizens of Southlake to the federal government needs to be to go to hell.
Yeah.
That we do not recognize your authority to impose your ideology on our children. We will not stand for it. You can go to hell. We're not going to be a part of that.
And I genuflect to our school board and Cam Bryan and Mr. Yeager, who recently said that they were going to retain the Alliance Defending Freedom, which is going to be a pro bono act, which means we're not going to have to pay for it. And we're taking the fight to them.
The one other thing I would mention about this whole thing, so if you go up a level, there's no fixing this. The Department of Education, in my opinion, needs to be
Gone.
It needs to be defunded and completely dismantled. It's not helping. I think it's harming children. Give that money back to the schools. They're not helping. In fact, they're hurting. Tear it down. I'm hoping Trump gets elected and will actually listen to Vivek Ramaswamy, and they'll tear that agency down.
Yeah, I hope so too. Because every dollar that ends up in the Department of Education is a dollar that never sees a classroom.
Exactly.
That's right.
That's well said, sir.
That's exactly right. So that's what I had, guys.
Gentlemen, I think we're going to wrap it.
All right.
Yeah.
Good
Good
talk.
discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Well done. Well done. God bless America.